What's up, Bible geeks, and welcome to The Edge. I'm your host, Scott Logan, and if I'm being completely transparent with you, I can say that I'm painfully tired of winter. No, I'm not even speaking metaphorically. I'm in a lot of pain. Yesterday, I spent all day doing the cleanup of a huge nor'easter that we got a couple of days ago, where we had waist-high snow drifts all the way through our driveway and sidewalks. As a matter of fact, we had so much snow that I felt compelled to film it for you guys and add it to our family's YouTube channel. If you want to see that video, go to loganfamilyvideos.com. That's the URL that will direct you to our YouTube channel. I know one thing, spring can't come fast enough. Now, this week, we are finally entering the last chapter of Ephesians, but we're still continuing on in the same thought process that Paul started in the previous chapter when he said in verse 21 of chapter 5 that we as Christians should be submitting to one another in the fear of Christ. He then goes on to lay out some illustrations of that, and for the last several weeks, we've been focusing on the first illustration of the mutual submission between a husband and a wife. We've been talking about marriage, and now as we start Ephesians 6, Paul is continuing on with the next illustration, which is the relationship between parents and their children. Now, this is something that, truthfully, I've never thought much about until the last couple of years. Back in 2015, Shannon and I had our first and only child, Eliana, or as we like to call her, Ellie. As of this podcast, Ellie is 21 months old. She's not even 2 yet. And just like I have a personal spotlighted passion for successful marriages, the same has developed over the idea of invested relational parenting. I'll talk more about that later, but let's get Ephesians chapter 6 started by reading verses 1 to 4, and then we'll dig in. Verse 1. Children, obey your parents as you would the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the Lord. Fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So Paul starts out by saying in 1 and 2, children, obey your parents as you would the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. If I wanted to raise a kid, then great, my job is already done. But it doesn't stop there. What I'm doing is trying to raise an adult. And if I want to bring my kid up to maturity and to godliness and to virtue and effectiveness for the kingdom of God, there are 2 things that need to be taught first. The first is to obey their parents, and second, to honor or respect them. Why do we need to teach them that? Because obedience doesn't naturally flow from a child. David said it in Psalm 51:5. He said, "Indeed, I was guilty when I was born. I was sinful when my mother conceived me." When our little ones are born, there is a curse in them. They are little, sinful, selfish, self-centered, rebellious reprobates. Cute and cuddly, but reprobate. They're unprincipled. That's obvious when they get here. They scream, and not because they're sympathetic to anybody else's pain. They scream only for their own. They're just preoccupied with themselves. They think that no one exists but them, and then they grow a little beyond that infant stage, where now they become really good at disobedience because that is the thing that's built into them. That's what naturally flows. If you are or have been the parent of a young child, you know that you're not spending their first few years saying yes all the time. Why, yes, honey, absolutely. What a great idea. Yeah, you should touch that and put it in your mouth. Yes, yes, yes. That is not the case. It's more like, no, 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 stop, put that down, pull your pants back up. Because most of a child's tendencies are towards counterproductive and disobedient things. They're good at disobedience. You don't have to teach them how to disobey. Left to their own condition, they are utterly selfish and utterly self-consumed. They want what they want when they want it. They don't want to wait for it. They're completely impatient. They have no regard for anything that you're concerned about. The whole world revolves around them. The reason why is because it's the initial expression of their depravity. The only thing we proverbially have in our possession when we enter this world is our sin nature. Naturally, that's what we're going to showcase with our behavior. That's the first challenge we face with teaching our kids obedience. And the other is the world around them that as they grow up will help foster the depravity that they brought into the world when they were born. Right away, in the early years of a child's life, there are so many evil influences to try to push them in their depravity too rapidly towards adulthood. Influences that are overexposing them to everything without the maturity or ability to deal with it. If there isn't strong control over these things from a parent and the teaching of obedience along that path, you've got a rebel on your hands. This is scary, but it's been proven through a survey done by Psychology Today magazine that kids have become overexposed to sexual sin in music, literature, movies, and television. And with that overexposure, children have been pushed into deviated thought processes way before they can deal with them or control them. And this is scary, but this survey said that there has been a physiological result to this kind of overexposure. And that is that the age of puberty is getting younger and younger. In the 18th century, one of the popular things in Europe were boy choirs. These were soprano singing boys. And they would stop singing soprano, according to history in the 18th century, at the age of 18 because that's when their voices would change. Now, for the most part, their voices change between the ages of 13 and 14. Physical growth, as late as the year 1900, continued until the age of 26. It now stops at about 18. The average age of puberty in the year 1900 was 14 years old, and now it's 12, dropping about 4 months per decade. In the year 1600, the average age of puberty was somewhere over 17 years old. So you have this depravity in them reacting to the world around them that makes it difficult to bring a child into control and into alignment with the standards of the Bible. Just a few more facts to put things in perspective. We were just talking about the overexposure to adult themes that kids get through the media they watch. The average child watches 40 hours of content a week. Most of that includes YouTube, and then also Netflix and Hulu, and then a few hours of live television. By the time they graduate, all of the hours they spend watching this content would add up to 20,000 hours more than any other activity other than sleeping. The majority of that content usually pushes an anti-God lifestyle. More facts. 10 million children have venereal disease, with 5,000 more added every day. 1 in 5 kids use drugs twice a week. Over 1 million engage in prostitution before the age of 16, and between 7 and 14 million children are alcoholics. According to the Children's Bureau of Health, Education, and Welfare Group, 2 million need help in psychiatric clinics. Guys, this is what happens when you have a curse on the inside and corruption on the outside. So there we see the need for involved parenting and teaching our children in the ways that the Bible teaches us. All right, back in verses 1 and 2, children, obey your parents as you would the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. And let's just throw in verse 3 for flow, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. These scriptures are the only ones in the Bible that command children directly. So that's why it's important for parents to teach and emphasize these verses. So there's no age limit here. The Greek word for children just means offspring. So as long as they're under parental control and care, as soon as they're old enough to know what is right, they need to be taught this. Obedience is the key for restraining that depravity they have. Now, the word for obey is hupakuo. You guys remember when we talked about the word for submit, the word hupatasso that meant to rank under? Well, once again, hupo means under, and akuo means to listen. So to obey someone means to get under and listen to them. Now, a cool thing to remind our kids of is that Jesus set the example during his childhood. In Luke 2, verse 52, it says that Jesus was obedient to his parents. Now, there's a lesson in obedience. The Lord of salvation, life, and glory, who is the creator of the universe and who was the express image of God and the one that angels worshiped, was willing to subject himself to obeying a village carpenter and his wife. Now, of course, there are instances, and I've seen some of these in my life, where children are living under the authority of a godless savage who demands that they do things that are contrary to the laws of God and even the laws of man. And Paul isn't saying that children need to obey orders that are contrary to God's commands. Bear in mind that Paul is mainly talking to the Christian home here with the expectation that the parents are well-adjusted, God-fearing people. Now, Paul quotes from Exodus chapter 20 and reminds us of the fifth commandment in verses 2 and 3. He says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. And that promise, here in verse 3, he says, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. And Paul is just saying that children who grow up to love and respect and obey their parents have a better foundation for a successful, happier, and more stable life. More so than the child who is rude, disrespectful, and rebellious, who may have a rocky road ahead of them with that kind of continued behavior. In verse 4, Paul says, fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. There is a balance here because God isn't calling children to obey their parents without giving a judicial order to their parents. Though verse 4 says father, it's not leaving out moms. The Greek word here is pateros, which is translated as parents. Parents should not drive their kids to anger with unreasonable demands or outrageous punishments or inconsistent examples or rules. I mentioned at the top of the show how passionate I can be about this, and because of some abuses I've witnessed, not with my own parents, but with others, I've witnessed it with other friends or even family. As I grow in my relationship with my daughter Ellie, I become frequently more sensitive to this when I see it with other kids and their parents. No matter what age, children are people. They are not mindless objects to be bossed around and bullied. Let me tell you about Ellie. Ellie is a person who has her own thoughts. She has her own feelings. She has her own hopes, and she has her own fears. She has her own distinct likes and dislikes and interests. I'm going to have the privilege of being an involved parent and friend to her as she grows up. And I know there are people who would raise an eyebrow to that, who always like to use the statement, well, you're their parent, not their friend. Forgive me, but I believe that to be a misguided ideal that's still trying to hit the mark, but loses balance. I'm a very blessed guy that I grew up in a Christian home with parents who were lovingly involved in my life and gave me the tools I would need to endure trials and temptations and still stay on the straight and narrow. My dad never ceased to lovingly guide me and correct me as I was growing up, even when I didn't like it. but he also was a friend to me. So much so that as I grew up into adulthood, our friendship would mature with it as adult brothers in the Lord. He was the best man at my wedding, and for 15 years, we served in various ministries together, and he's still one of my best friends today. We would never have the relationship we have today if he had said, I'm his parent and not his friend. If the transcendent God of the universe can be our father and our friend, then I can be the father that guides and lovingly corrects Ellie, and is also that friend that she can always feel free to bring her joy, happiness, fears, and broken heart to. Ellie will grow up, and I'll watch her change many times over. Her body, her mind, and her personality will keep developing, and she's going to grow up in a carnal and confusing world with many people who share very different morals and values than I or Shannon do. Which is why she needs to be taught now through love to be obedient and respectful to us, and the guidance and the correction we give her that is grounded in our loving desire to see her succeed, and most of all, in the love and mercy of Jesus. Christian parents have no greater responsibility than to make sure that their children are raised in the fear of God, in the knowledge of God, in the knowledge of the gospel, in the reverence of the Bible, and in the presence of Jesus. Well, guys, that's going to be it for this week. If you want to know more about The Edge, then check out our website, theedgepodcast.com. All of my social links are at the top right corner of the page. Give our Facebook page a like and follow me on Twitter at EdgePodcast1. Next week, we'll continue on in Ephesians chapter 6. But until then, this is Scott Logan saying, have an awesome week geeking out on the Bible. And as always, when you live on the edge.